Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boils and ghouls, to Season 2, Episode 29 of Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze. I am your host, Jeremy Vilmer. It is 2019. Why don't you tell them what's going on, Bobby?
Hey, first of all, Happy New Year. Second of all, first, it's great to hear your voice, Jeremy. And second of all, Happy New Year to all the great fans out there, the Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze podcast. We appreciate you joining us. We're glad to have you back, and we hope you brought in 2019 the right way. Today's show is going to be a special show, and it's going to be the top 10 of the best announcers of professional wrestling. But we have some other stuff going on, too. First of all, Jeremy, I'm just going to mention, do you have any special news before I go into what I was going to bring up?
Well, Bobby, why don't you ask me how my New Year's was?
Well, okay, let me start again then. Yeah, because I wasn't sure if you was going to bring anything up or not. Hey, Jeremy, how was your New Year's?
Well, Bobby, I had a fucking heart attack. How was yours?
I stayed in. Home. I stayed home.
I spent it in the hospital. I want to encourage anybody listening right now, if you have been ignoring being told you have high blood pressure or that your parents had a heart problem at about your age, you need to take it a little more seriously. Otherwise, one day you're going to wake up, think you have to poop really bad, and then about an hour later realize you're having a heart attack and need to go to the hospital. It was a rough couple days. I had 2 stents put in my heart, but I'm feeling a little bit better now.
Well, take your medication, get better, and hopefully you'll be up and about and feeling 150% better real soon. So we wish you to start this new year off. We don't want to lose you right away, man. We want to do a whole season of 2019. We got this whole second season to get through. So stick with us a little bit longer, and I'll try to do the same. Because you know my saying, because I put a picture up, and I'm just trying to outlive a few more people, including myself, man. So,
exactly.
And I know you're younger than me. But glad to have you with us, man. First of all, anything else about that other than take care of yourself?
That's pretty much it. You know what it is that I get done, I get out of the hospital, and one of my aunts tells me, oh, yeah, well, you remember your dad had a heart attack at about your age. And I'm like, no, I don't remember that. And that might have been helpful to tell the doctors that while I was in the hospital.
Yes.
Because the whole time I'm there, they're like, well, what illegal drugs do you use? And I'm like, none. I don't. And they're like, heart attack at 45. Okay, no drugs, whatever you say there, buddy.
Yeah. It's kind of like the Ozzy Osbourne question. When he went to the doctor, it's better off to ask me what I haven't done than what I have done. But since you are drug-free and clean, it was something hereditary. So
it was,
glad they got it corrected, though. So glad to have you here with us in 2019 on the Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze podcast. So if number one, first of all, I just want to say, if you haven't, you probably will be watching the replay back of because it's already taken place. The New Japan Pro Wrestling Kingdom 13 took place.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they had a big crowd, record-setting attendance as always, and I watched some clips here and there. I usually wait a couple of days. I can't remember exactly what day they play it back, but I usually watch it a couple of days later anyway. I think it's usually around January 8th somewhere. That's Elvis's birthday, by the way, and we're not working on January 8th. No one works on King's birthday. So everyone's got that day off if you want it off.
Oh.
Which is going to lead me to bring us to some other news. The All Elite Wrestling, Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks are part of that. They're having a big announcement on January 8th. Tony Khan, that's going to be in Jacksonville, Florida. Tony Khan has put $100 million of his own money into supposedly. I guess Cody is the VP, the Young Bucks are executives, and Brandy is the marketing director of the brand, I guess, is what I've read. There's a really good article in Forbes magazine that looks pretty legit. I think you've read it. And the event that they're going to do next is going to be called Double or Nothing, kind of play off the All In. So let's see what happens with this All Elite Wrestling. It looks like they're going to be serious. And we'll have to see if they're going to be a contender, and up the stakes with everything that's going on with the NWA and all the other stuff. And I'm going to say something about that as soon as you finish up. Anything you got to add about New Japan or with the All Elite?
I have said, we've been doing this show for 6 months. The entire time, I think I've been talking about how my excitement over the NWA title being taken as a serious world champion, coming back, or a championship and coming back to these indie promotions. It appears to me that people are honestly ready to throw some real money into opening a new wrestling promotion to contend with the big dog. I am excited, and Bobby, the other reason I'm excited, a book you and I have both been reading called Death of the Territories during this holiday season. We are seeing, you and I are reading the book that shows how the whole system collapsed, and we could be watching the new phase of a whole new system of small independent promotions springing back to life happen right in front of us.
Yes, and let me say this, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know this, so get ready.
Okay.
Because here you go. Well, I'm just going to tell you, I just made a contact a few minutes ago prior to going on the air because I saw an ad. I knew this was going to take place on February 23rd. The NWA, the company that I know around this area called FTC, Failure to Conform, okay? They're having a big show on February 23rd. They're bringing Nick Aldis in. If he's still the NWA champion, he's going to be wrestling Shane Strickland in Ironton, Ohio on February 23rd. And FTC, who I got invited to their Christmas party, and I know they put a thing up that the NWA title has never been seen defended in this area before. So I shot them a note. And I'm going to tell you what, I have personally wrestled for the NWA title 3 times in my life, twice against Dan Severn, once in Charlotte, once in Knoxville. And yes, the NWA title has been defended in this area. I'm speaking of the Huntington, Ashland, Ironton, tri-state area. This is a shout out to FTC. Hey guys, I didn't defend, Chris Candido defended the NWA title against me at the National Guard Armory back in the day, right when he was finishing up for Smoky Mountain and working for ECW and also going to All Japan and having the NWA title before he went to the WWF at the time. So, if you can use that on your fucking show when you bring in NWA champion, if he still is the champion at that time, Nick Aldis, to defend it against Shane Strickland, I'm going to be at that fucking show because I want to see this. Cause I'm getting excited because Jeremy, you're the one who originally turned me on to Nick, and I'm hoping to go over, if nothing else, shake hands with all these great men, these great performers, these great wrestlers, and this be a small part of that show because my day has gone and has come and gone, but I wanted to bring to them, and I wrote them a quick note, and they shot me back. So we can definitely use that as history because it is. I said that title has been defended in this area before, so it's very exciting. And so I'm gonna give them a quick plug to the FTC for bringing in the NWA on February 23rd at the Rona Theater in Ironton, Ohio. And none of that is rehearsed, none of that is even talked about. I just wanted to come off and let you know because I'm getting pretty damn excited about it, man.
Yeah, there is still something cool about that belt floating out there. Nick Aldis is a hell of a good wrestler. Yeah, that's pretty exciting. Too bad they got their facts wrong. And, you know, Bobby,
I'll straighten them out. Don't worry about it.
And if it ever should come up while you're talking to him and the opportunity for me to interview Nick Aldis for Geekish Cast comes up, just give me a call.
Yes, I will do so. I knew the show was coming. I've talked to a couple people. I know several people coming in for it, but I saw a Instagram post, and I saw that, and I thought I'm just going to bring it to their attention real quick. And Joe, or whoever's running their media, I don't know if Joe actually runs that part of the media, to be honest with you, but whoever does, they got right back to me and said, yeah, we can definitely use that. So over the course of the next couple of days, I hope to make some more contacts and see how I can tie into this. And I don't want any, glory out of it, nothing like that. I always try to go to their shows, and I'm going to go and I'm going to try to make some contacts. And if that's the case, I'll try to see what kind of interviews and pictures or anything, multimedia or social media we can get going.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great.
Give them some coverage and also to plug our own show, which we better get our asses back to.
Yes.
Season 2, episode 29, top 10 of the best announcers of professional wrestlers. And one thing we did, just briefly, let's mention this. We try to keep it, at this point, only play-by-play announcers. So we've got several things in store. We had about 4 3 or 4 ideas for the podcast, but there was a good reason as to why we are doing the best announcer of professional wrestling. And would you like to tell them why, Jeremy, and maybe start us off with number 10?
The reason why is, well, as usual, we have 3 or 4 ideas, and then something happens to make us focus on one. This week we did lose one of the greatest mic men in pro wrestling, Mean Gene Okerlund. I will tell you real quick, when I started Geekish Cast and I started doing interviews, my son Micah went and bought me an old 1980s Galoob Mean Gene rubber figure because I was now an interview guy, and Mean Gene was the greatest interview guy of all time. And he still sits on my shelf where I keep my microphones.
Right.
So
on.
that is one that I when I was a kid, and I had just started watching wrestling, and you were seeing Mean Gene on his way out on the AWA and on his way in the WWE. Mean Gene is probably the most important stick man in history, which kind of gets us to focus in on who are the important announcers in pro wrestling. And we're going to start with our number 10, who is a personal favorite of mine, Bill Mercer from WCCW.
Okay, very good.
Yep. Now, Bill,
I like that.
Yeah, Bill started with just general sports and radio announcing out of Muskogee, Oklahoma, I believe. And the reason Bill stays on my top list is I have a preference for that old school style of serious radio voice announcing. And when they were still trying to pull that hoodwink bullshit move where I'm going to laugh about this and I shouldn't. Gino Hernandez had just passed away, but they were still trying to say that Chris Adams had been blinded by Gino Hernandez. And he comes out and goes, Gino Hernandez is dead and Chris Adams is blind. And his voice carried the gravitas that for a second you're like, holy shit. And then you go, oh, wait, half of that's bullshit. I forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, that's wild.
It really is.
Well, I'm glad you shared that with us, and I was trying not to laugh when you told the story, even though I knew that was coming because you had mentioned it before. But so we started off number 10, Bill Mercer. I'll do number 9, and you could do number 8 because I know who's going to do number 7 as well. How's that? Because we're kind of keeping this to who we both are familiar with more so and who we liked. And again, man, we started off a shitload of people we could put on this list, but we just tried to keep it to the ones that we want our audience to enjoy the show. So number 10 is Bill Mercer. Number 9, Tony Schiavone. Okay, so most people remember Tony Schiavone, from the National Wrestling Alliance. I think he had a short run with the WWF back in the day, and then, of course, World Championship Wrestling. But there was a quote there: at the height of the Monday Night War, veteran broadcaster Tony Schiavone's voice was vital to the on-screen product of championship wrestling. Yeah, that's a quote that, and again, we're going to get into this later on. We could sit here and read you Wikipedia facts and stuff like that, but I put that down because I was at WCW during the height of those wars, and the only thing is I always, Tony apparently, someone mentioned my name on someone else's podcast a while back. I think you brought it to my attention. And then he's like, at the end of it, goes, oh, yeah, I remember Bobby Blaze. Well, I'm going to tell you something. Tony was doing Tony, and of course, he has some color men, and we'll get into those. That's a whole nother podcast. And at the time, Dusty was one of them doing the color with Tony on Saturday night shows, the Bisco and those guys. But Tony was interviewing me, trying to get some background information on me and talking to me about, because when I come in, I come under kind of a different premise as to what kind of push I was going to get. I was going to be a Mr. Saturday Night kind of guy, and around the time Rob Van Dam was going to be like Mr. Monday Night. And anyway, I was going to get some wins on WCW Saturday night and on the flagship station, TBS and all that. Anyway, I'm telling Tony a story and this and that. And I told him like Terry Funk's my favorite and some people that took me under their wing. And I've got some of that stuff on tape or DVD now. Someone's converted it for me. But I told him a story about, hell, I was even a fan of Dusty's back in the day, and I always appreciate Dusty because I'm talking to Tony, and I said, I really appreciate you and Dusty putting me over on the show each Saturday, man. I said, it's really good to just good feeling hearing, my name on WTBS because I was such a fan as a kid. And thanks for the kind words that you said, and also it's Dusty. And he turned around, he looks at me, and we're like somewhere in Detroit or I don't know, bumfuck or wherever they did a TV taping at. And he turned around and looked at me, he goes, "Big Dusty, huh?" And I said, "Yeah." And because I'd already told him the funk, I liked funk and the stories there, this and that. And he goes, "Well, just think about it this way, Bobby." He said, "Buddy," he said, "I don't know if they had heat, if he has ribbed me to this day or what." He said something like, "Well, if you work hard enough, just think, you can be a big fat drunk ex-champion yourself one day." And maybe truer words were never spoken, Tony. Maybe. I don't know. But I think you got a little bit hot because I was putting Dusty over about putting me over on the show when Tony was doing the calling. But, yeah, he said something to that effect about, well, just think about it, Bobby. If you work hard enough, you could be a big, fat, drunk ex-champ, too, if you want to be. Yeah. That's my Tony Schiavone story. And if Tony listened to this show or whoever show he does with or whatever, and that gets back to, Tony, big shout-out to you, man. I know he's done baseball and other sports, and I never had any problem with Tony. Got along with him just fine, and I don't think his WWF/E run was very, very successful. I don't know because I was so busy back at that time. But just being a fan of the old NWA and also of being working there during the Monday Night Wars and stuff, I give Tony Schiavone the number 9 spot, and that's a pretty good spot for him, I think.
Oh yeah, well, and there's a couple things I want to add to that. I mean, I can't remember where it was said first or who said it first, but Tony is the voice of pro wrestling south of the Mason-Dixon.
Yeah.
I mean, that is he has a great voice. Like I have an ear for voices. I hear voices all the time that I am jealous of. Bill Mercer's one. Tony Schiavone is definitely one. There are a couple times when old Tony stepped on his dick. I just want to throw this sentence out there for everybody. That'll put butts in the seats.
Yeah.
But he was a great play-by-play guy. He could get excitement across. His podcast that he does with Conrad, What Happened When? That is
I knew it was Conrad. I just couldn't remember the name of the podcast. Thank you.
A great podcast. It was a lot of fun. They meant to do it short term, but Tony, who started that show, Mr. Schiavone, had a very, very bad spot in his heart for pro wrestling when he started that podcast, and it was going to be a temporary thing. Since then, he has gone on to start calling matches for MLW, and the podcast has gone into a full-time thing, at least temporarily, at least for the time being. So it's great to hear that pro wrestling podcast had such a positive spin in this particular case.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Good deal. All right. Well, you want to take us to number 8?
Yeah, we'll go to number 8. We'll go to the other professor, Mike Tenay.
Yes.
I believe Mr. Tenay started one of the earliest pro wrestling newsletters when he was like 11 or 12 years old.
Wow.
I believe it was the Los Angeles market. I'm doing some of this from memory and some stuff I read over the last couple of days while we were prepping. When WCW started crossing over with more luchador style wrestling and this, that, and the other, not a lot of people working at WCW had the expertise of the moves and the maneuvers and the holds to call luchador matches. So that is how Mike Tenay became involved.
Yeah.
Coming out of Los Angeles, he had the exposure to the luchadors. He knew the names, knew the styles, knew everything. And it was a really good fit. While not the greatest voice, he was a professor of wrestling moves, man. He knew what he was talking about.
Well, not only that, Mike Tenay also knew professional wrestlers. And I have nothing but respect for Mike. Like you, I think you called him the professor there.
Mm-hmm.
When I first came in, he called a couple of my matches when I come into WCW, and he stopped me one day, and we had a very nice chat. And unlike Tony give me the best of luck speech there about what he said, Mike said, Bobby, he said, I just want you to know, he said, I'm fully aware of you and who you are, and that you were the former Smoky Mountain Heavyweight Champion. He said, but you know what? He said, I can't mention any of that stuff on the air about you. He said, they just won't let us mention other companies, especially Southern wrestling companies, and we just had a really nice talk. And I think it's probably one of the, other than a hello, here and there and a handshake, is one of the first times, you're busy backstage with production. You get there so early and a lot of stuff's going on. But he kind of filled me in a little bit about my career. Of course, obviously I knew about, but I was surprised he knew about. So if he knew that about me, I'm pretty sure and I obviously knew he knew about the luchadors and those type things, and the moves, obviously. But I'm pretty sure he must knew about a lot of other guys too that come in from regional territories that he just couldn't, wasn't allowed to get across on television. And but he did take the time and was courteous and professional enough to sit down and talk to me and fill me in on some things, he knew about me, but he has to cut this way and that way on the television. So I'm sure he's done it for several other guys. I know he went on to work for Impact and do some, a lot of different pay-per-views and whatever. But like you said, maybe not the greatest of voices, but knowledge. I think the man was very, very deep in wrestling moves. Like you said, the luchador moves and names, but not only that, he also knew a lot of independent guys, and he knew their names and where they had come from and things they had accomplished in other territories. And for that, I have a lot of respect for Mike Tanabe, because again, he took the time to shake my hand in a very busy time. I was there, like you said, I was there during the Monday Night War times, and this would have been around early 97-ish, late 97-ish, early 98-ish. But, what a great, and he was also a very nice gentleman. I'll say that. He was a very nice gentleman. So, anything else about Mike before we move on to number 7?
Well, it just that, you were talking about his knowledge of the wrestlers in the business. I did come across a piece that back in the days before videotape, he would audio tape wrestling matches and trade those with other people. So he was definitely a guy who was searching for more information, more matches, more wrestlers early on. Apparently he quietly retired about a year or two ago from wrestling.
Okay, I was wondering about that. Yep. I hadn't heard anything. Of course, I don't watch a lot of updated stuff anyway. But I hadn't heard his name thrown around, so that does make sense to me.
Yeah, and he like a lot of people in pro wrestling, he has a podcast, but it's not about pro wrestling. He's got a podcast called Professor Vegas, which talks about sports betting.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, hell, he's pretty. That's something I need to listen to, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
So I don't know. Okay, we'll move on to number 7. How
yes,
about
sir.
That?
Let's do.
Number 7, man. Number 7. I don't know if I've ever met a nicer man in my life. I can honestly say that he was such a nice guy. Bob Caudle. Bob Caudle, man. He was the many years the voice of the NWA. He started with Crockett Promotions. I know it was in the late 50s for Crockett Senior. He worked all the way through the 70s, the 80s. Mm-hmm. He was the voice of the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. Hello, wrestling fans, and a sign-off. That'll do it for this week. We'll see you next week, and until then, so long for now. And he called the viewers fans, and I think that made, and I grew up, I didn't get to, I don't say grow up watching them. When I got to my late teens, early 20s, we started getting that Mid-Atlantic and in syndication. And I got to become a fan of his because he did draw you as a fan. As a viewer, you was his fan. And I got to work with him at Smoky Mountain Wrestling, man. And that's why I said, hey, I don't know if I met I always say Bobby Eaton, one of the nicest people you ever meet in professional wrestling. Bob Caudle was such a professional and such a nice man also. Always treated myself, along with all the talent that I saw coming and going through Smoky Mountain, he just treated everyone with such respect, and his voice was so respected throughout the South, especially when you was talking about Tony Schiavone, south of the Mason-Dixon line. The same kind of with Bob Caudle, man. Of course, he done more of that Mid-Atlantic. You can go up and down to, the coast there to Carolinas and over through wherever, Georgia, Tennessee, up in Kentucky and wherever. But man, he just and he was taken so serious, and he treated the sport very serious also, and he never really took the heel side or the baby face side, but he would definitely, say that's just something that's disgusting, that shouldn't be taking place. He kind of let the people know, that he was calling it as he saw it. He obviously, but he wasn't necessarily pulling for baby faces, and he wasn't necessarily, trying to stooge out the heels. He was just calling it like he saw it, and I think that's why a lot of people liked him. And he had a great interview style too, really easy to talk to. Cornette would tell me, I had an interview coming up, and he said, mention this and mention that, and Jimmy, he'd tell you today, I'm still not the best interviewer in the world. I never will be, but he could feed me a couple lines and say, this is what Bob's going to ask you, and this is the direction your character is going to go, because I can cut a better heel promo than I can a babyface, but I needed a job, wanted a job, and I loved Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Yeah. And I said, I'll come in as a babyface. That's fine with me, because I'd wrestle all over the world, and all over the world I'm a fucking heel, because I'm not from South Africa or England or Japan or Australia, wherever I happened to be at that time. But Jimmy, I knew I could work as a babyface, and so the interviews he had to say, go this direction, you're the underdog, and Bob would just feed me, and I'd play off what Bob asked me, so he made it very, very easy. Yeah. I may have stumbled across my words, but Bob never did. He just threw it out there. Bobby, man, you've had some big victories here in the last couple of weeks. You're an up-and-comer, and then he'd feed it to me, and I'd just go with it. But he was obviously much better at it than I was, because of his years of being a professional. Sure. And but it was a wonderful work experience for me when I was first, making a good break in my early career. So I never forget Bob just treat me so nice. So there's that. That's why he makes it. And I wish I could rank him higher. I really would. But that's where I'm going to leave him at right now at number 7.
No, I think that's a good choice. And when we were coming up with this list, I almost shit my pants when I realized I hadn't even thought of him yet. And and then when I was doing some thinking and reading and watching a couple quick clips on YouTube, that's when I realized that's where you get your use of the word fan. And I'd never put it together in my head before, because you use the word fan when talking about our listeners all the time. And I had never thought maybe where it had come from. And then finally I put it together. But Bob Caudle.
That's why you're the professor.
Yeah. But Bob Caudle was one of those guys. I'm going to put him up there with others that we're going to talk about. He was a sports journalist. He sounded legit. He seemed legit. Everything about him was straightforward, no bullshit. Like you were saying, he didn't take sides, and his voice had the sound of authority to it. Yeah. Yeah. And he left. Go ahead. I was going to say he left. I was going to do a real quick recap of his career. And he was, like you were saying, he worked for the Crockett's. He was the NWA Mid-Atlantic guy. He left WCW and joined Smoky Mountain, where he stayed I believe he stayed at Smoky Mountain its entirety.
Yes.
And he might be the only Republican that Jim Cornette likes.
That's can't top that, man. All right, man. Well, let's close in on number 6. I'll say what I had to say for someone else. They'll come back. Don't worry. But yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. Number 6. We're not going to have to say a whole lot about number 6 or number 5 probably, but we're going to throw them out there. And again, we could sit here and read you stuff off of the internet or something, from Wikipedia or whatever. And we're not going to do that. So a lot of times we just go by the fly. I mean, I can't make up a Tony Schiavone story and you're going to see it on his Wikipedia page, So right. I can't tell you the Mike Tenay story I've read it on Wikipedia. So anyway, the next one's number 6 is Vincent Kenny McMahon. Vince McMahon. Yeah. And the first time I saw Vince McMahon was 1979. I'm probably giving away my age, but I was about 15 years old, and I was in Baltimore, Maryland. I know I mentioned that a lot on this podcast. I went up there and spent a summer up there. And, of course, on the East Coast, they had the Capital Sports, and they did the Baltimore Arena, and they did the Cap Center and places like that. and they got WWF Wrestling, and I saw Vince McMahon, and he was in the role at that point as early as, for me, was 1979 that summer, as a announcer. And so that was my first experience. And I saw him interview, I never will forget, Ted DiBiase was there, and he was way before he was $1 Million Man. Andre, also handsome Jimmy Valiant before he was the Boogie Woogie Man years later and things. So I got to see Vince early on as an announcer. And then, of course, as time went on, I guess on the USA Network, I'm just kind of going off my head here. Eventually we saw him again as an announcer versus the owner, and the before 85 and before the WrestleMania and all that came out. So that's my earliest memories of him, and he actually done a pretty damn good job of it. He sold with the facial expressions. He had a good voice, had a good look about him. Wore the sports coat. He looked very professional. I remember those type things. So number 6 is Vince, and I'll let you go on and tell a little bit about what you think.
Well, yeah, and I was going to say, younger listeners, younger fans of our show will not remember a time that you watched Vince McMahon on TV but did not know he was the owner of the company.
Yeah.
He was actually pretty austere in keeping that shit under wraps. He was a guy who would come out, call matches, and like you were saying, when Vince McMahon was young, he was a guy who worked out all the time. He ate well. He was young. He was handsome. He was big and strong and powerful. He had a great voice. He could communicate clearly, which is not a skill all of us have. Like, I struggle all the time to make sure I'm using the right words. He can just roll right off of his tongue with exactly where he wants the story to go, who he wants you to cheer for, and he had the ability to communicate that with passion and professionalism and enthusiasm and get those angles across probably better than anybody else. And then him secretly being the owner of the company only helped put that over that much more.
Yeah, I agree with what you said 100%. That was well worded. Vince would be proud of you.
Yeah, I'm sure many of our regular fans listening right now are going, did somebody kidnap Jeremy? What the fuck is going on here?
Silver Scorpion, is that you?
But
did you have a change of heart with that heart attack?
But yeah, I've been told to avoid stress no matter what I do, so I'm kind of bringing things down this week. But no, when he was starting off, and this book we're reading, I'm getting a lot more perspective about things he brought to the business that had not existed before, and kind of finding a new admiration for what he tried to do, not as unintended consequences, but the things he actually said, here's what I am setting out to do, and got done, are pretty goddamn amazing. Yeah. But that is enough of me kissing Vince's ass. Let's go on to number 5.
Okay. Well, number 5 right behind Vince is Gorilla Monsoon.
Yep.
And at one point he owned a percentage of the WWF, I guess, at one point from Vince's dad. And, he was a former performer there, of course. And, he was a great announcer, he was a great performer. But he's such a great announcer, they have the gorilla spot named for him, where you stand before you go out, before you go live on TV or to be taped. There's a spot that you stand at before they send you out beyond the curtain, and it's called the gorilla spot, and it was named after Gorilla Monsoon. And he had a lot of good partners over the years, but I don't have any real good personal stories other than I met him a couple of times in person, and when I went to a backstage area a couple of times. Of course, I did a couple jobs back in the day, early on in like 91, I think it was. He called the matches with I think color back then was Bobby Heenan. We'll get into that another time. Mm-hmm. But always in the back, very nice, very polite man, very professional, very courteous. I remember one time, I wasn't even a really big guy, maybe 220 compared to guys at that time in WWF. But, he goes, "Hey, big man, how you doing?" And he, many years later, after I left Smoky Mountain, I was at a house show in the back, and he was there. And he said the same thing to me and my buddy was a friend of a fan of his, as I told you before, Sergeant Slaughter, another one he liked growing up. And when I introduced myself, they knew who I was at that point, but they didn't know my friend. But they said, "Hey, big man, how are you?" And, Gorilla calling him that made him feel really good about himself too. So just, I don't have a lot of stories to share about him except for, we've heard them over and over and over on the USA Network and worldwide, I guess, on every station they eventually was on. Gorilla Monsoon, great announcer.
Yep, I'm gonna add to that just real briefly.
Yeah.
Gorilla, the thing I liked best about him, and he's probably the guy that pushed me to like heels better than faces, because his ability to explain away, excuse away, and accept heroes breaking the rules after just having castigated the villains for doing so was so expert, it actually went too far for me. And I actually gained sympathy for the heels.
Okay.
So his ability to do that and explain it away was perfect. Also, he and Bobby Heenan might have not have been just one of the greatest announce teams for pro wrestling. They might have been one of the greatest modern comedy two-man acts in a very long time.
I wasn't going to say out what I was going to say, and I agree with you, though. We may have to come back to Gorilla Monsoon, because I think we'll eventually do a color commentary, and he had a lot of guys to work with when he done it with Ventura and some other guys, and Heenan especially, but excuse me, God, didn't mean that, but big burp. Edit that if you have to, but he had some good people to work with, and like you said, he got over, but he also got the person working with him. They knew how he let them get over as well. Is what I'm getting at, I guess. So we may have to come back. Gorilla's name may come up again as to his importance of being an announcer in professional wrestling. So just kind of throwing that out.
Yeah.
And I think we actually, let me say this too, we kind of did we both kind of had a Bobby Heenan out there, and we decided, again, we'll kind of retread back on this in just a moment, but we kind of said, let's do announcers, not color men, so that's why we're going with just at this point professional wrestling announcers. So I'll just kind of leave it out there until we jump down a little bit. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, but I like that. Yeah, him and Heenan, that was a good team. I have to agree. So anyway, that takes us to number 4.
Yep.
Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do real quickly. How's this? Before we jump into number 4, I'm going to jump back up. I'm going to give 10 through 5, and then I'm going to give let you give out a book plug or two, okay?
All right.
Number 10 on this episode, Season 2, 29, Top 10 of the Announcers of Professional Wrestling. We had number 10, Bill Mercer. Number 9, Tony Schiavone. Number 8, Mike Tenay. Number 7, Bob Cottle. Number 6, Vincent Kennedy McMahon, Vince McMahon. Number 7, Gorilla Monsoon. And we're getting ready to jump into number 4, and I'm going to jump ahead just 1 second here. Number 4 is going to be Jim Ross. And before I say anything else about Jim Ross, he's got a book, and it's called Slobber Knocker, and it's out there and it's available on Amazon. And so Jeremy's going to tell you how to help our podcast out by going to a couple of tiny URL links to help pay for our podcast. And with that said, I think this book of the week will be Slobber Knocker by Jim Ross. And also, Jeremy, just kind of take over and tell them how to help support our show, and we'll go from number 4, 3, 2, and number 1
you got
on
it.
our list of top 10.
All right, so everybody, you can go get JR's book, Slobber Knocker, by going to tinyurl.com/BBJimRoss. That will take you right to the Amazon page where you can purchase his book. I know Bobby has been reading that book and has liked it quite a bit. Other wrestling fans I have talked to have liked it. Also, at this time would be a good time to remind you that this show is sponsored by 2 of Bobby's own books. You can get the first one, Pin Me, Pay Me, Have Boots Will Travel, by going to tinyurl.com/blazebook1. You can also get I Kicked Out on 2, The Education of a Wrestler, by going to tinyurl.com/blazebook2. That will take you right to the Amazon page. You can pick them up right there, digital or physical copies. They are great gifts. If you are wrestling fans who have not read it, there are a lot of great stories. Bobby is a guy who's been in the business and around the business for a while and has met people and has great shit to share about all of them. I can't remember if it's written down, but it's a story about you running into Macho Man in a flooded bathroom in one of those books.
Yes, it is.
There he goes. That is one of my favorite stories that I tell.
The Macho Man and Bobby Blaze about took a double knockout right there in the bathroom. Yep. Dig it.
All good stuff.
Yeah. And, here's the thing, guys. You can get my books on Amazon. He already gave you the links right there. Slobber Knockers out there. You can get the book about Dusty Rhodes. Also, a book I'm currently reading. It was a gift from a friend of mine named Jeremy. He sent me as a gift. It's very nice. Death of the Territories. And I think that book is also on your tiny URL. Is that not correct?
It is, but I can't remember I don't have that address in front of me.
I'm just saying, you can go and anything you go to buy a book, make sure you go through the Jeremy's affiliate program there using the tiny URL. I don't know how that shit works, but I'm hoping he makes a dime or two, or I hope he makes $1 million off. That'd be great. But let's get back on course with Jim Ross. Jim Ross, I'm reading Slobber Knocker. I stopped. I'm about probably the way it's written is each chapter is only 2 or 3 pages, so I'm probably on like chapter 15 or so. Mm-hmm. But I'm only probably a fourth of the way through the book, to be honest with you. But Jim Ross, man, here's a guy that really paid his dues, working back in the territory. I think you got to start like back in around 1974. Man, he was going to school. He was just doing some different things. He ended up driving for Wass's territory for McGurk,
the blind guy.
The blind guy. He drove Leroy around, so he paid his dues that away. He also ended up driving around a couple of the baby faces that worked there, and they really smartened him up, not giving away anything. But he got that big, that's right when the UWF was starting to take off too, and he got a big break with the Mid-South back then. Of course, he worked for NWA, he worked for WCW, he worked for WWF, and I got to meet and talk and hang out with a couple of times Jim Ross when I was in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. That's when he was dealing with and overcoming his Bell's palsy. He took a break from being on TV and WWF at the time, WWE, whatever. And he come in for Smoky Mountain, done some work with Les Thatcher, another great announcer who could have easily been on this list. But Jim Ross is on here, and Jim probably could have been a lot higher. Some say that Jim is probably the number one. We have a reason we do our own list our way, and that's just that,
Mm-hmm.
It's our show. It's the Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze podcast, and Jeremy and I, we go through a list, we do some eliminations, and we add in and we take away or whatever. But, Jim comes in at 4. Good old JR, we'll say, comes in at 4, and I know he's great at what he does, and I hate that he's number 4, but we have a reason for that, and you'll soon find out, especially if you're a fan of his show, how that works. But, Jim was really, really kind, really quiet when he worked in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I did a lot of production meetings, and, of course, again, he was overcoming a severe the Bell palsy and, appearing on TV like he did, and going through what he did. But just a very kind man, very fair man. And, I found him to be a very honest man. I didn't have any real dealings with him in WWF, when he got there, when he went back there, anything. I did speak to him. Always complete gentleman, but I never had the opportunity to try out after that with them, but I did talk to him and was in negotiation with him at one point. It went the opposite direction with WCW, and I think that was best for me. But while he was in Smoky Mountain, what a complete gentleman he was and a professional, and everyone knows what a great announcer he is. And I would imagine, I could be wrong, but I would imagine he just done the New Japan Pro Wrestling Wrestle Kingdom 13. I would imagine he done that this weekend, if I'm not mistaken. And I think he might be in negotiations to work some for either the NWA or for the All Elite Wrestling. I'm not sure, because I know he still does some work for WWF as well, or WWE. And that's all I kind of got to say about Jim. But good old JR.
Yep. So my knowledge of Jim Ross definitely started with the UWF. And then its purchase and folding into WCW. That's definitely where I came from. I would have put him higher, and I know a lot of people say he's the greatest announcer of all time. I don't like that bombastic style. Now, I realize that's just me being a cranky old fuck. I get that. But, you know, like, I think he had a great voice. He typically knew the names of every hold and maneuver and position and everything. I just don't like when you stop calling the match to scream out the name of the move 5 times in a row. Yeah. Hurricane Rana. It just doesn't do anything for me. Now, that being said, you'll notice that he made a living calling matches, and I'm sitting on my ass in a home studio. You know.
No, he's great. Good old JR is great, and he could have been up higher. I don't think he could have been up any higher on our list than the next person. Can I go ahead and say that safely?
Please do.
Because here's where we're going to go with this. Number 3 is the reason we're doing this podcast in honor of announcers is because, as you called them, the greatest, stick men in the business, maybe?
Yep.
Mean Gene Okerlund. And as Hulk Hogan said, it was the best partner I ever had. We never rehearsed or did anything scripted from a writer. Gene would ask me, hey, big man, what do you want to do? And I would always answer, just follow you, brother. And it worked. And as Ric Flair called him, you know, mean by God, Gene. So we're kind of doing this. We had several to start with, podcast ideas, and with his passing, may you rest in peace, Mean Gene Okerlund. You were great. Someone asked me on Twitter, and while I'm speaking of Twitter, follow Jeremy at the Geekish Cast. Follow me at Bobby Blaze 744, or follow our joint account, which Jeremy does a wonderful job of, at the Bell to Bell Blaze. Those are all on Twitter, but someone asked me if I had any Mean Gene stories, and I really don't have a lot. He was in WCW while I was there. I spoke to him a couple of times. A lot of those times were about 6 a.m. at an airport bar. So it was one of those things where you just come in and everyone's tired from the day before, and you have an early flight, and you come in, and someone's down the hallway, someone's trying to, you're trying to get to this next little area, and there's a bar along the way, and you might have 2 hours for a flight, and you're there, and you go in, and someone may either be finishing up from the night before, coming in from one of the local establishments or the hotel, and airport's just opening. And I never really sit down and had a drink with the man, but I'd always shake his hand, say hello to him, and many times that's where I saw Gene was at the airport following one of our TBS or Turner Broadcasting Network television programs, if that makes sense, whatever I'm trying to fucking spit out there. So I didn't really get to know him that well or anything. No real funny stories about Mean Gene other than he was always one of my favorites because, man, he was out there and he was with Friday and Kamala out there. Jungles and fuck, he done everything and everything. He was interviewing Andre to Jake to every fucking person in the wrestling business. That man has had some kind of interaction. And I'll let you, because you had the story at the beginning. You just go on from there. How you have your stuff, Mean Gene Okerlund, and while we're doing a show in honor of him.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Mean Gene was always everywhere. He was in the AWA when Hogan got hot before he jumped. He was at the WWF while Hogan was hot. And he was at WCW when the NWO was tearing up the whole fucking planet.
Yep.
Mean Gene was everywhere. He always got the great interviews. He was always funny, even as he started to age and maybe wasn't the hippest of cats in the company. He was still able to turn phrases and his timing was good. And to me, one of the funniest things ever was when DDP went for the self high five and Mean Gene tried to get in on the action and missed the high five. And and his disappointment carried the rest of the moment.
That's pretty good, yeah. That's pretty good. So anyway, that's number 3 is Mean Gene Okerlund, and may he rest in peace. And I'm glad that we had some good just something good to say about him, some good memories, and a good reason to go ahead and throw in this podcast as we had top 10 announcers coming up at some point, and what better point than now. And that's going to take us to, as we mentioned, Jim Ross being number 4. We put Mean Gene in there at number 3. Even though he wasn't like a play-by-play per se, he was great on the stick and everywhere and every place he needed to be or was important at the time he was there. And that's going to take us to number 2 and number 1, and I think our fans especially, and if you're new to the show, I think you'll like our number 2 and our number 1, and feel free to reach us at the on Twitter. I know also, let me say that there's a fan page and a group page on Facebook. Jeremy can tell you about that. You'll hear about it again at the end of the show. But on Twitter at the Bell to Bell Blaze, on that you can hit us up at BBBB, and you can give us our, what your top 10 announcers are. Ask us questions, send in feedback, because we do interact with everyone. But I'm going to let Jeremy introduce number 2, and I'm going to introduce number 1, and you'll see why Jim Ross can only make it probably to number 3 at the highest, but we gave that honor to Mean Gene and our respect for his recent passing. So, Jeremy, who's number 2?
Well, number 2 is Gordon Solie, the Dean of Pro Wrestling. And I will supplé anybody who says otherwise.
There you go. Yeah. Man, what a great number 2.
Yeah, Gordon, again, like I've said this whole episode, for me, there's a veritas and a reality that comes with that sports journalist style of match calling. And Gordon nailed that. He made it seem like a real legit sport every time, a competition with a prize at the end for the athletes in the match. Also, his use of the word supplé always set him apart.
Yeah.
I mean, the first time I heard it, I'm like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? And all of a sudden, you're like, maybe he knows more than everybody else.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Well, I was going to
say, we're both getting too excited.
Yep.
I was just going to say, to go back to Jim Ross, he cites him as his most significant influence of his career. So that's kind of to show what kind of importance. If everyone's out there, if you want to bitch and moan and say, well, JR should have been number 1 or whatever, consider this, our number 2, Gordon Solie, is cited by Jim Ross saying that was the most significant influence on his career as an announcer. And everyone, Gordon Solie was just great. And, he came up with the wearing the crimson mask. That was the other thing with your souffle. And I could be wrong on this, Jeremy, but it seems like I remember him saying it on Georgia Championship Wrestling. He had said so long from the Peach State, but I do know on Florida Championship Wrestling or Championship Wrestling in Florida, he'd always say, so long from the Sunshine State. I once want to double check if he said that from the Peach State when he done Georgia Wrestling, because it seemed like he would do that when he'd done that sometimes when there was maybe 82, 83, somewhere in that time frame when they jumped over a little bit when he was doing both Georgia and Florida. But anyway, Gordon Solie, man, like you said, the Dean. Man, he did that Championship Wrestling in Florida, and he worked everywhere. He got to work with, he even worked with World Championship Wrestling, and Georgia Championship Wrestling. A lot of people, he's probably number 1 on I would imagine on our list of listeners. Gordon Solie might be on their number 1.
Oh yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So, anything else about Gordon there at number 2?
No, I think, for people who don't know Gordon Solie, all I'm going to say is you need to go find some matches. I mean, they're not going to be as energetic because, Gordon was probably drunk when he was calling some of those. But he is going to have a temper and a tempo and a style that just lends legitimacy to every match he called.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things that I was a big fan of his back in the day. And, like I said, it's just in that style that he used and our number 1 is going to use in Bob Caudle. There is a veritas and a gravitas and a gravity that comes with the style of calling sports that the way they did it.
Yeah. Yep. And with number 1, with all due respect to Gordon Solie, number 1, my personal favorite, and our number 1 on this list is Lance Russell, the voice of Memphis Wrestling. Man, I don't know. That's the voice I grew up on at a young age. And Lance Russell, he just had the greatest voice of professional wrestling to me of all time. You know, again, Gordon Soley could have made it as number one to a lot of these younger people, maybe your good old JRs or whoever. But on this list here, I hope our listeners can agree. If you don't, please feel free. Let us know. Give us your thoughts. But I know several that did write in, direct message me. They had Lance Russell at number one, and Lance got to start way back in like 1959. Man, he did that Memphis wrestling. You know, things I guess that stand out in my mind are, I consider and say, oh yeah, well, he was in the NWA or USWA and a Wrestler Hall of Fame, the Wrestling Observers Hall of Fame, and all that. But the thing is, that's kind of the voice it is the voice I grew up on wrestling. And the way he called it, just that he live announced it, you know, the Memphis, I call it the Memphis tapes, even though I'm saying that, is because by the time I saw it, it was on tape delay. We got out of Lexington, Kentucky, but they shot that live for like 40 years in Memphis, Tennessee.
Right.
And, man, it just come across. And he also did, the live matches at, Tupelo, Mississippi. Sometimes he'd go out to Louisville, from my understanding, or to Nashville and do some live matches as well. But, he called the, live announced, taped house show matches from Tupelo. And, man, he was the one calling the concession stands brawl. And so I never will forget that because, you know, I was about 15 at that time, 14, 15, and we're watching it. And, of course, I'm saying it's live because it was live when it was taped. So by the time we saw it, probably, you know, the early, maybe a couple hours later that day or whatever, when it took place earlier or the night before, man, you talk about believability, and we've talked about that concession stand brawl, but just his voice of getting that over. We talked about in detail the absence of fans with the Lawler and Funk empty arena match. And Russell's there, you know, putting out, he just now lit a cigarette and said, let me put this out, you know, and,
yep.
And, just the way he come across, and you know, Katie, it's just one of those things where he stood there, he'd be interviewing someone and he'd say, you know, Jerry, get someone out here. You know, if they started brawling or fighting in front of him, he took it so serious. Hell, he took bumps. You know, he unintentionally took bumps for the fucking company because they'd be brawling in front of him, and he took it so serious. He would try to get out of the way, but sometimes he'd unintentionally knock him over, and he'd take a bump, and he'd grab his microphone or lose his glasses. But the believability, and I know that he called, I think he went to Lexington, Kentucky, and called matches too sometimes. So I know I've heard him live. I never had the honor of meeting Lance Russell, and I wish I would have, because he is my favorite all-time wrestler, or voice of professional wrestling to me is Lance Russell, and I'll just kind of let you finish it out from there. And if you all disagree, hit us up at BBBB. If you agree, hit us up at BBBB at the Bell to Bell Blaze. Also, there's I forgot to mention, we've got a YouTube page out there as well, ran by Tex, and you can hook it up. It's the Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze podcast, I think, on YouTube. So look that up if you want to. Jeremy will tell you about the Facebook page, but first he'll tell you about his thoughts about Lance Russell, and that's kind of all I'm going to say about Lance, because I'm getting too damn excited, and I know we're short on time. But Lance is my number one, and Jeremy's number one, and we'll go from there and let Jeremy do what he does best.
Yeah, you're going to fall out of your chair like Lance did with that take on that episode of Memphis. Yeah. No, he was great. Again, he did that. Well, so he's a little bit different than I'm going to say that Caudle and Sully were, in that Lance would actually get himself into chest poking matches a little bit with the heels. Oh, come on. Don't you start with that smart stuff here with me. And not to steal from the 605 pod, but he was always disappointed in the bad guys. You know?
Yeah, that's true.
He always had that sound just like your uncle when you did something wrong at your grandma's house. Like, oh, no, I can't. So Lance is a little bit different, even though he had that same kind of stylistic veneer that a Gordon Soley or a Bob Caudle had. That same kind of classy, old school sports journalist. He was great fun to watch. He turned phrases better than anybody, and he had a delivery that was like a smarter Foghorn Leghorn. That was kind of fun to watch, and these days, I believe it's still the case that if you go onto Amazon, if you're part of Amazon Prime, you can find old videos of Memphis wrestling and watch him. Who was his partner? Dave Brown. Dave Brown. Yeah. I suddenly drew a blank on his name.
That's okay.
They were another kind of old school comedy duo team.
Yeah. Without trying to be.
Yeah. They had a delivery that was nice and smooth, but you could see that they had bits and, like, what do you think, Bobby? And, he starts, no, never mind. Well, back to the ring.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
I always loved that about that. Yeah. But, so anyway, man, I tell you, once again, it's good to hear your voice, Jeremy. And I'm glad you're still amongst us here in 2019. And to the fans out there, again, you can follow us. Follow us on Twitter. You can find Jeremy at the Geekish Cast. You can find me at Bobby Blaze 744 on Twitter, as well as our joint account, Bell to Bell Blaze. And this has been Season 2, Episode 29, the top 10 of the best announcers of professional wrestling. And I think we've got a lot of stuff off of here that we can go into some color commentary and some different stories about a lot of different guys. But, man, get back with us. Let us know what you think about the podcast. And if you stuck with it this long, we appreciate it because we got a lot of more good stuff planned in the future. And, Jeremy, I'm just glad to hear your voice, man. And it's always great. And I'll keep you posted on the NWA title is coming to this area.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I'm going to just try to keep up more with 2019, delivering better and better podcasts because we love what we're doing. And as I call them, they are our fans. So, fans, thanks for sticking with us, and I'll let Jeremy take us out of here.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to let Nate do what we do.
Okay.
Well, yeah, because he gives out all the addresses and everything. It's pre-recorded, so I'm not going to have to stumble over my words. So he'll give out our Facebook address and all that, and the musical closing of the show. So if you want to know where to follow us, just stick around for a couple more seconds after we wrap. You'll hear the music start, and Nate will start talking, and all the addresses for Facebook, for Twitter, for our GoFundMe, and everything else will be in there. So everybody, I want to thank everybody for tuning back in. I do appreciate it. I want to thank the Sutter Health Group here in Modesto, California for getting my heart going again. That was very nice of them. I haven't seen the bill yet, so I might curse them later. I do want to encourage anybody out there with a family of, or a history of family heart problems. If your doctor tells you you have high blood pressure, fucking listen to them. Don't blow it off. Cause, 45 is a young age to start having heart attacks, and apparently that's where family history kicks in. So, for Bobby Blaze and for myself, Jeremy Vollmer, bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze. You can follow the show on Twitter at Bell to Bell Blaze. You can also follow Bobby on Twitter at BobbyBlaze744 and Jeremy on Twitter at The Geekish Cast. To purchase one of Bobby's books, you can visit tinyurl.com/blazebook1 to purchase Pin Me, Pay Me, Have Boots, Will Travel. And you can visit tinyurl.com/blazebook2 to get I Kicked Out on 2, The Education of a Wrestler. To donate to the show's podcast hosting fees, you can visit GoFundMe.com/Bell to Bell podcast hosting fees. Be sure to include a hyphen in every word in Bell to Bell podcast hosting fees. If you follow and listen to the show on Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star review. Be sure to share the show with any wrestling fan you may know, and get on the Facebook page where you can keep up with Bell to Bell fans just like you. Again, thanks for listening to the program, and look for the show again next time.